I'd now like to invite Mallika Ishawaran, a member of the Shell Scenarios team and senior economist and policy advisor in Shell, to tell us about the world beyond 2050. Pretty exciting. Please, a big round of applause for Mallika.
So, before I sort of jump into it with my presentation, we have a poll. We have another poll for you guys to tease your brain a little bit. So, here's a question. Approximately how many people across the globe still live without electricity? Is it A, 100 million, B, 500 million, or C, more than 1 billion? Just enter it in your app. No shouting out the answer. Okay, can we get the results up? Okay, so yes. So everyone, that is 100% on 1 billion. That's the right answer. Well done. So sometimes when you live in London, which is where I live, you forget that there are large swathes of the world where access to energy is the key issue. And the decarbonizing and environmental impacts are a little bit secondary. So it's a good reminder to think of that. Okay, so my name is Mallika, and as I was introduced, I'm a member of the Shell Scenarios team. I'm an economist by training, and I spent, before my career in Shell, about 4 years ago, I spent most of my life as a policymaker. So I work in that space between economics and policy. And that's sort of the input that I provide to the Scenarios team, especially as we go ahead and we look ahead 50 years, 60 years, to a world where policy makers and policy interventions will increasingly be shaping the size and the shape of the energy system. So it's sort of understanding that imperative and providing advice on that particular context. Clearly, the Scenarios team itself has different skills. So you have energy specialists, you have economists, policymakers, as well as geopolitical experts to understand the full range of factors that are affecting how the energy system evolves. Now, before I go into the Scenarios team and the work we're doing, I would like to acknowledge the 3 teams here from the student scenario competition finalists. So I would like to congratulate them on the excellent effort. I had the privilege of spending time in each of the sessions and getting to hear each of the teams in their presentations. And what struck me was the enthusiasm and the thoughtfulness that went into producing these scenarios, whether it is about how data information is used either at the individual level or collectively to provide services like the Singapore team, or whether it's about urban development, different models, Bangkok versus Chiang Mai, and what that means for energy use, or whether it's about understanding, government-led versus bottom-up entrepreneurial development. It was fantastic to see the range of scenarios based on these sort of drivers. Now, this is what we do in the Scenarios team. So that is a bit of a flavor of what we get up to. This is a picture we took at our last away day. So, so that's where the magic happens, if you like. But Scenarios is a tradition in Shell that has been going on for over 40 years. So it certainly predates my appearance and most of the folks here. Essentially, to understand how the energy system is going to evolve and change, it's not a simple effort. There are multifaceted drivers that are affecting how the system is evolving. There are economic drivers. So as people get more prosperous and wealthy, they tend to demand more energy. There are social drivers where motivation towards creating social value, reducing inequality, drives the kinds of improvements in energy access that we'd like to see. And then there is also the political aspect of it, where policy and politics come together to change the energy system. Now, when you're looking ahead to 50 years ahead, under these circumstances, a forecast is not going to be very useful. Over the really long term, these drivers could look very different and could manifest themselves in very different ways over that kind of time scale. Not only that, but these drivers also interact with each other and sort of affect how the energy system is evolving. So understanding that by using a simple forecast is not that meaningful, because the uncertainties around that forecast are so large, especially over the longer term, that they render them almost meaningless. So also we use scenarios in Shell as a way of putting our arms around these uncertainties in a structured manner, producing scenarios or views of the world in the future that are internally consistent, and then help us as a company to explore what that would mean for the energy system, and what does that mean in terms of risks and opportunities for Shell in that energy system. Now, when the scenarios started in the 1970s, it was a time of quite a lot of turmoil and sort of volatility. We see the same sort of volatility today. You see the economic volatility following the financial crisis of 08-09. You see the sort of social unrest and the push towards greater social value and equality. And also you see then the political unrest and the move away from globalism towards more national interests. So these are similar trends that make the scenarios as valid today as when, you know, this sort of effort in Shell started. So the energy transition is in transition. You've heard that from all the folks that have spoken before. And that transition is exemplified by the Sustainable Development Goals. These are UN Sustainable Development Goals agreed by the entire membership of the United Nations in 2015, a few months before the Paris Agreement in December to restrict global temperatures to 2°C or below. Now these goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, speak to how do you give people a good quality of life. So it encompasses all the different elements of what makes up a good quality of life. It looks at economic prosperity, it looks at gender equality, it looks at educational attainment, energy access. But of these 17 goals, which will all affect the energy system in different ways, some are particularly important to point out. One is reducing poverty, so increasing the standards of living. This number 7 is greater energy access to affordable and clean energy. And then you have goal number 13, which is reducing carbon emissions from this. Now these have implications and set out the problem or the challenge facing the energy system. Firstly, raising standards of living and improving energy access means you're going to have more energy demand. The energy system by the end of this century is going to be double the size of the energy system today. So that's the scale of the increase in demand as a result of those sustainable development goals. Now you need to balance that with the fact that it's about clean energy and climate action. So that increase in the demand for energy cannot be met by the mix of energy we have today, because that already we are seeing environmental boundaries on air quality, on carbon being breached. So imagine a system that's twice the size of what it is today. It needs to have a different mix of energy to meet that demand. And that sort of exemplifies the challenge we have today, which is how do you provide more energy, but cleaner energy to meet that demand. So we have a way of breaking it down, looking at the sectoral picture. And here what we try to do is look at it's not just about changing the supply of energy, it's also about changing how energy is used. So you look at the 3 large end-use sectors. So buildings, commercial, residential is one sort of large, broad sector. Industry, manufacturing, other sort of industrial processes. And finally you have transport, where it's not just passenger, but also rail, marine, aviation. And then you have the energy supply that's going to become increasingly important in the future, which is power. And how do you decarbonize that supply so that you're supplying clean power. Now, each of these have different technology solutions that will apply to them. Each of them have different policy enablers that will drive that change in that particular sector. So there is a whole sort of heterogeneity in the kinds and types of solutions that you need to drive these changes. The timing is also going to be quite different. So for take power, for example, the technologies are largely known. So renewables, it's nuclear, carbon capture and storage. The challenge is about getting the policy coordination around it to integrate these into the power system of today. If you compare that with something like industry, the technologies maybe are known. You could electrify some sort of light manufacturing. So there is that possibility. And then once you decarbonize power, then that's a solution to that just slug of industry. But there is a big chunk of industry that requires high heat that is not met by electrification. What do you do about that? So the technologies are underdeveloped. At the same time, governments and policies are not supportive of change because that directly affects the competitiveness of domestic economies to put any sort of restriction or constraints on industry. So that is a very tough sector and probably going to take a while to change and to decarbonize. Now, after that, what I would like to do is focus a little bit on the cities angle, as we are in Singapore. And as Sui Chen said, it's sort of the lab for doing things. So cities are going to be sort of an increasingly important part of the story of decarbonizing and of the energy transition. So right now, about 66% of energy consumed is in cities. And that's expected to increase to about 80% by the middle of the century. There are lots of statistics about urban development, but one thing that stood out for me was that a city about 1 million will be added every week until 2040. That's sort of the scale of urbanization that's going on. A lot of this is going to be in the developing and emerging world. So the Indias and Chinas of the world is where you're going to see this sort of mass urbanization. So these are also places where sustainable development for a country like India is wrapped up intrinsically in sustainable urban development. You cannot separate those two goals. So again, you see the city sort of aspect coming out quite strongly. We're also seeing more and more cities getting empowered and being able to be more nimble than sort of the national governments. You see that on the climate agenda in particular. And what is that? You see all the mayors of the major cities coming together to see what they can do as sort of governors of these sort of urban developments, to see what does that mean, what can we do to reduce the risk, to make our cities resilient, to make our energy consumption more efficient, and to develop the innovative solutions that can then be piloted and then scaled up to the national level. So cities are sort of extremely sort of important. They're a microcosm of what the national and global changes needed to happen. Now, this requires a sort of coordination and collaboration, and we've heard that with the title too of Powering Progress Together. It's about governments leveling the playing field between different types of energy sources and users in a way that respects the environment. It's about businesses then innovating and providing solutions that allow the standards of living and energy consumption to grow while respecting the environment. And then finally, it's about consumers changing their lifestyles and also taking a proactive and active role in demanding the kinds of products and energy that support that lifestyle. So it's about the alignment between these three sort of main actors in society to deliver the change that you need. And cities are a microcosm of that. They are a smaller scale of the national and global problem of coordinating and aligning these actors along these lines to deliver the transition. And so again, I'd like to say that this is kind of thinking that we incorporate within our scenarios work when we develop them. And this is an ongoing effort in our team and across Shell to develop what we think a cleaner, better energy system is going to look like, that respects the environment, but also provides the energy needed to power rising standards of living and to power sort of great aspiration of people. So now I'm going to conclude on that and just going to stop by saying our new scenario will be released at the end of this month. And so I would encourage folks to look for Shell Scenarios hashtag to see the latest when it's being released and what sort of information might be available on it. But the focus of that work again is to explore how do you achieve this more energy with a lower environmental footprint, and what does that world look like in 2070. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mallika Ishawaran, a very thought-provoking view on our future world. Did I hear you right when you said 1 million people a week in the cities? Let's just let all of that sink in a little. These are really quite slightly terrifying facts, but I think the very point that's being made is that our work is very much set out for us. To achieve beyond 2050, the work actually begins right now. Thank you very much. A big round of applause once again from Mallika.